Hello and welcome to the 12th Sustainability Lunch Talk. As usual, this lunch talk is recorded and will be uploaded on the sustainability webpage in the coming days. Please be aware that we will not take questions during the presentation, as a dedicated Q&A session will take place at the end of the presentation. If a question pops up during the talk, feel free to write it down in the chat and we will ask it at the end. My name is Mathieu Gileron, and I'm a project manager in sustainability for the University of Luxembourg. With my colleague Laurent, one of our missions is to raise awareness on sustainability among the community. To help us, we have the chance to be surrounded by brilliant experts from teaching, research, and administration. And today, we wanted to highlight the amazing work of the university researcher, Jeff Mongers. From transforming a wooden pallet into a garden table to making clothes from fishing nets, the desire to reuse is evident. However, there is a significant difference between your nephew transforming a plastic bottle into a piece of art and circular economy. Data and logistics are key for success. What can be recycled, where and how, with whom? In the end, if the final consumer doesn't dispose of it properly, it will be, of course, lost. However, achieving circularity primarily depends on the initial stages of a product life cycle. Making the right choices is essential to ensure full circularity. Dr. Jeff Mongers recognized this need and aimed to provide a user-friendly tool using field data. Our host for this lunch talk will be Dr. Jeff Mongers. He is a postdoctoral researcher from the Faculty of Science, Technology and Medicine of the University of Luxembourg. He holds a PhD from the University of Luxembourg, and he is currently project leader of the FNR Jump-funded Circurement project with the goal of commercializing his research to promote resource recovery by aligning product designs with end-of-life process chain. I trained to say that, but you will say it better than me, Jeff. Our host for the day is Professor Nicolas Jonard. He will moderate this talk. He is full professor in economics and management at the University of Luxembourg. Nicolas' research focuses on innovation, inter and intra-organizational networks, and organizational behavior. Why did I put that word again in the sentence? We are very excited to have them both today. And without further ado, Professor Jonard, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Mathieu, and welcome to the distinguished audience who have joined us on this sustainability lunch talk. It's a pleasure and a privilege for me to co-host this event with Jeff. I'll just take a couple of minutes to provide some contextual elements, and then I let the expert speak. So if we are gathered today, it's of course because we are, to a significant extent, aware of the importance of the need for an energy and ecology transition. I think the issue is well implanted in society, to say the least. It's not so controversial anymore, and nowadays the questions are really, the questions that arise are really about the ways in which this transition can be implemented. It requires a lot of course, understanding of how the system Earth, as a system with several feedback loops, how the system Earth functions, and of course we need to understand the interdependencies that exist between climate change, between biodiversity, between the use of non-reusable resources, energy and other resources, and we need to understand what it could mean to be able to sustain the functioning of this system. You have probably heard about planetary limits and planetary boundaries, which are, for instance, one way of defining formally this sustainability, a donut in which we as a human community should try to maintain our system so that we are not exceedingly taking from the system and at the same time helping those on this planet in other countries and also in the countries where we live to reach satisfactory levels of developments and of living standards, if I can put it this way. Of course, there are socio-economic antecedents and consequences of this transition, and this is why it's a complicated process to handle. So the circular economy, as Mathieu has mentioned it, is of course one element which is often put forward. The idea is to move away from a sort of linear thinking, which humanity has been relying on so far, in which it produced, it used, and then it disposed of the things it did not want to use anymore, and to move to a different model in which it produces, it uses, and then to some extent it recycles. It recycles because it just cannot continue consume non-renewable resources to the extent that it has so far. Over the past 2 centuries, mankind and our standards of living, generally speaking, have fantastically increased. We have never lived as long. We have never had access to so many consumption possibilities. In a way, compared to the standards of living of our forebears 200 years ago, we are extremely privileged. But what also we have to accept is the idea that perhaps things cannot go on at the same pace. As we have grown, the population of the world, its economies, the standards of living of the populations, our global productions of materials in general, like plastics, like paper, like aluminium, has also increased very significantly. And if we do not have proper waste management system, this growth in consumption will lead to a significant increase in mismanaged waste. That's unavoidable. And this will lead to pollution of the ecosystems such as rivers, lakes, oceans. So improving our waste management practices is essential. It's essential to limit pollution, but it's also essential to reduce the amount of raw materials which we are constantly producing. So by recycling, we can reduce, although we cannot eliminate, because recycling is always imperfect, we can reduce the production of new resources. Plastic is one of the waste, or the types of waste which we as a society excel at producing. Plastic production has increased from post-World War in the 50s from roughly 2 million tons per year to nowadays roughly 500 million tons per year. So it's a factor 250. That's definitely a lot of plastic. It has had much value for us because it's a very cheap material. It's very versatile and it's sterile. So it has a lot of applications. You can think of food, of course, but you can also think of health and medicine in general, where plastic is ubiquitous. Of course, when it's mismanaged, i.e. it's not recycled, it's not incinerated, and it's not kept in landfills, then it becomes a pollutant, disseminates everywhere, and we have now evidence that between 1 and 2 million tons of plastic enter our oceans on a yearly basis, and of course they disrupt the environment, they disrupt wildlife, they disrupt ecosystems. So improving the management of plastic waste, which is the theme of today's talk, is critical. I will now let the floor to Jeff. I think he has a lot to tell us about that. Again, I repeat what Mathieu has said. When you have questions, please be so kind to type them in the chat. I will try to collect them, and then we get back to them at the end of Jeff's talk. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the talk.
Yes, so welcome all very much. Thank you very much, Nicolas, for the introduction, and also Mathieu for the organization of the lunch talks, sustainability lunch talks, which I think is a great opportunity. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the topic design for destiny. So the idea is actually that we link the end of life of product, so the processes which we have behind, with the beginning of life of products, so the design, for example, of products. As Matteo and Nicola already mentioned, in the background you can see a picture of how the sorting facility, for example, in Luxembourg looks like. So you have different fractions of packagings which are sorted, and that's going to be the main case study which I'm going to talk about today. But please don't only use it as one case study, but there are also other products possible. So let's get started. So the agenda for today. On the right side, you can see a QR code for Menti afterwards, or you can simply go to menti.com. It's after the presentation, a short interactive questionnaire, which I would like to do with you so that you also can interact and present your own opinions about it. Then for the agenda, I'm going to try to be done within 20-25 minutes. First, a short introduction to circular economy, what's the general concept. Then I want to give you some waste numbers. Nicola already started with it. I'm going to go more into detail about packaging and PET bottles and also show you our current solution. Only afterwards, we're going deeper into the design for circularity, a brief introduction into the regulation and the laws which are currently in place in Europe. And that's specifically more for packaging and also batteries, which might be another interesting field for people listening here. And then the fourth point, actually already going more into the discussion parts, the business model for circular economy, which for me is always super or important actually, because if the economic viability is somehow missing, it's always difficult to actually get it done, the solution on the market, or bring it to the market. So short introduction to the problematic, which we discovered. One field is called extended producer responsibility. So it's a payment scheme or a fee scheme actually to apply that people actually making better designs, for example, for products. And afterwards, what we can actually do with products which are already in the market. I'm going to show you a few examples which are already existing. So let's get started. So the circular economy itself, introduction about what it is. A scheme which I always like to show is the Ellen MacArthur butterfly diagram, which you can see here. On this one, actually in the middle, I'm going to try to go through it with you. We see more or less the, let's say, the linear economy, what we have been doing the last centuries, I would say. So first we're going to start mining some materials. Then afterwards we're going to produce a part, a product. Then it's going to continue to the service provider, for example, distributor. And then we can either consume or we can either use a product. And then afterwards, normally it always went to either energy recovery or actually landfill, or even worse, somewhere in the nature, like littering, and we actually lost the material as well as the product. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation now, or the butterfly diagram here, shows now two divisions. So one technical cycle here on the right side, and the biological cycle on the left side. And the idea is always that we try to get either like the product, like for example here with the maintenance, or with the reuse, the product itself, keep it in the loop. Or actually the material, like for example, a longer loop, the recycling loop, where you need to go the way around, but actually at the end, we'll also be able to keep at least the material inside the loop. To show you a bit the difference between a biological and a technical cycle, a good example is, for example, a wheel from a car. Roughly or simplified said, it's two parts. So we have the inside and the outside. The outside, so the tire, which you can see here, actually in an ideal world, it would need to be into the biological cycle as we're actually consuming it. While you're driving, actually, it's getting less and less. And by that, actually, you're more or less consuming the tire. And as the remainings actually end up in the nature, it actually would need to be biological cycle and biodegradable over time because we're consuming that product. On the other side, we have the rim or the wheel of the tire. And that's actually technical product as we're using it. So for example, one part could be actually doing maintenance. You need maintenance to keep it in use. We could reuse or redistribute it if we sell it at a certain point. We could refurbish it, or actually at the very end, we could even like recycle the product to keep at least the materials which we used inside the loop. So that's just an example to show you a little bit the difference between biological and technical cycle. Now for the presentation which will come afterwards, or the slides which will come afterwards, I'm going to divide the slide into three main parts. So the beginning of life called BOL, which also the design is one part. So the very beginning of our product always. Then we have a middle of life. So the service provider as well as the consumer or the user of a product. And then afterwards, actually the end of life, or actually the end of life of the first cycle. So different streams which we have actually to get the material or the product actually back into the loop. And the main aim or the main discussion, or actually what I want to get through to you, is actually that missing information, which is always or quite often actually the case between the designing part and the end of life. So there are people who have processes to, for example, recycle packaging or to disassemble batteries. But that information is very specifically in that domain. It's often difficult to get that information to the people who are actually responsible for bringing the product on the market. And that's actually the main aim of this talk today, to bring that concept a little bit closer. With that one, also another concept which I want to introduce you to in circular economy is called value hill, and the main aims as well of the circular economy. The value hill actually quite nicely visualize the aims of it, as we have a first phase where we're going to create value. So you're going to see here again the same phases, for example, manufacturing components, assembly products, and retail. Then we have a second phase where we're actually trying to maintain the value, so the usage of our product itself. And the third phase where we're actually recovering value. And the value hill itself is actually we're trying to stay as high as possible. So for example, let's say a maintenance and a repair is actually somehow, let's say, better or should be used in the first phase before reuse or redistribution, then a refurbishment and remanufacturing, and only at the very end, the recycling, that we actually can get at least the material back into the loop. Now going to the main aims of circular economy, which normally mentioned in the literature. The first one is design out waste and pollution. This is active in the first phase, so the creating of value. Then we have to keep products and materials in use for as long as possible and at the highest level. And at the highest level is just what I mentioned, to try to keep them here as high as possible. And the third one actually to regenerate natural systems. Okay, moving now from here to some numbers, mainly for the packaging now, to give you like a rough idea about how much packaging or how much material we're actually using. Nicola just mentioned before the 500 million tons. In Europe, we have around 80 tons, so 79 million tons, which is put on the market each year. If you compress them normally afterwards, the sorting, you can see something like here on the left. It's like called a bale. So it's a compressed version of the different packagings after the use phase. And if you compress those and you would actually separate or spread all of this packaging now over Luxembourg, you would actually be able to cover the whole of Luxembourg with 12 centimeters of waste each year. So just to give you like a rough estimation about how much packaging we actually bring on the market, only, for example, here in Europe. Now digging a little bit deeper into those numbers, the numbers are from Eurostat and Enomia. We have around 40% cardboard, 20% plastics, which we're going to focus on now afterwards, 19% glass, 5 metals, and around 15 other products. So for plastics, we end up with around 15.5 million tons per year. And roughly it's said that around 17% is afterwards considered as waste and around 40% enters the material recycling loop. But this material recycling can mean different things, and it also includes, for example, a downcycling, for example, reduction of value. This would be, for example, if you use the packaging afterwards, for example, creating a painting fleece, as shown here on the image. Therefore, let's go a little bit deeper into the detail for PET bottles. PET bottles, we have around 3.6 million tons on the market. And actually look closer to the numbers, around 83% are somehow exiting this loop, and around 17% stay in the loop in a bottle-to-bottle recycling. So showing you where those outflows are actually going, and also with that coming to our solution. If we have, for example, this bottle here, it's normally produced from a cap. We have a bottle and a label, so there's 3 parts. Then the first phase is actually we need to, after the use, actually need to collect and sort our packagings. In Luxembourg, it's done normally with the blue bags from the Valolux. The numbers are for Europe, not for Luxembourg, just to be sure. And here we have around 40% of materials or products which are actually not able to be collected and sorted correctly. This can be because of littering, because we don't have the right infrastructure, so it's not sortable, for example, or actually because we don't have the right bins. For example, people are throwing it into the wrong bin. Then afterwards, we have a recycling phase. So as soon as we, for example, sorted all the transparent P&P bottles together, we are able to cut them into small pieces and get those small flakes out of it. Here we have another 19% of going to disposal, and around 30% going to other industries. This could be, for example, clothing industry or automotive, more and more coming. moving from the recycling actually to the material manufacturing. So afterwards, these flakes actually introduce into something called granulates. On the left, you can see that white color, which is virgin material. On the right side, this bluish color is normally recycled material. So you see the difference in color. Those are then afterwards used to produce these preforms, and the preforms are afterwards blown to actually get the bottle back into the loop. So the question which we actually asked ourselves now was, what can we do actually to somehow help improving this? And while talking to different stakeholders, mainly at the sorting and recycling facility, it was often clear that actually the requirements they need for the sorting or the recycling are different requirements which are often used for marketing. So making a bottle or packaging attractive is quite often not in line with actually is needed for actually being able to sort something correctly. So what we are now actually doing in the first step is that we're actually trying to, just give me a short moment, that we are actually now, it's not possible, sorting or actually going and collect process information. What do we need or mean with process information? This is, for example, a process how it looks for sorting packagings. So in Luxembourg, you can imagine that this would be the whole blue bag. So your Vololux bag would be lying here on a conveyor belt. And then with the laser, we're actually checking for different kinds of materials. It could be, for example, PT, a first one. And then whenever we see PT bottle here, the machine is actually shooting out those bottles into those green loop here. So at the end, we have one green loop or flow with only PT bottles, and the black one would be all the remaining parts. So we add up or put up those processes one behind each other, and then we can actually sort out different fractions. In Luxembourg, it's around 16 or 17 different fractions, which you can afterwards sort out from this blue bag. So that's the first step we're going to do. So we're going to go and see those processes, how they actually are in real life. We're going to collect that data. Then we're actually going to use that data to transform it to information. So actually recreating a digital replication of these processes, which in the third step, we're actually going to use or apply at the beginning of life so that people can actually do an assessment of their packaging if it actually is in line with the infrastructure of sorting and recycling, for example. And that, of course, with the aim that we can keep more materials into the loop. So I want to shortly show you how the tools or the first version we developed into a MATLAB tool. This was the first version which we did during the scientific work. So here on the left side, you can see what a designer can input as different criteria for his product. And then on the right side, you can see, for example, results. So where it would add up, what charges you would need to pay. This is called the EPR fees, so it extended producer responsibility. And in green, we'll always show you a few examples about how you can actually improve it. So let's go through with an example. So you can, for example, for 40,000 bottles, each weighing 25 grams, you can choose different criteria. So for example, we're going to make a green color. We're going to put a sleeve around it. We're going to choose a glue, a watermark on it, and we're going to simulate now for Luxembourg what's happening with this bottle. So this bottle here actually is not sortable in Luxembourg or difficult sortable, and it will go to an energy recovery, and you would need to pay around 900 euros per ton, which you bring on the market. Then you can simulate again or can improve it. It will tell you, well, we could get rid of that sleeve, simulate it again, we get a green bottle, or in this case now a second improvement, a transparent bottle. And now you can actually see that the bottle is going to bottle recycling, and you only need to pay 250 euros to bring that bottle on the market. The one always who brings the product on the market needs to pay that fee. So in this case, it could be, for example, a supermarket or a company itself selling it directly. So our idea or our aim is actually that we can do those assessments based on real data which we get from the industry itself, to transfer that knowledge from the end of life to the beginning of life and make it easier that those two different stakeholders can communicate with each other. What's next steps for us? Currently with students from the University of Luxembourg, we are developing a recyclability platform, which we have a project running on with Vololux and the Luxembourgish Environmental Agency. And here you can see, for example, two screenshots. So our homepage, and afterwards how the first version of the recyclability check actually looks. So you can type in a bottle which you created before, and then you get, for example, here below a small simplification of the processes, and always highlight, for example, in red, it would be highlighted in a process where you actually have problems with your specific design. Then moving on a little bit to the regulation and the laws. So this European level, actually the main part or the covering part is called the Circular Economy Action Plan, as well as the European Green Deal. Then for the design, you have something called Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. So if you're interested in designs and if they are in line with this actually required from regulation laws part, you can have a look at the other one. And here, if you go a little bit deeper, actually, for example, in Luxembourg, very interestingly, is called the PCDS, Product Circularity Data Sheet, is a product passport which will actually allow you to bring the information from the first producer of a part of material actually to the final one, who's actually at the end has information about the product to disassemble it, recycle it, and so on and so on. So you can have a look here at the website, or it's even like now being standardized within ISO. Then why do actually companies need to take care? There's something called Green Claims Directive proposal on EU level. And with that one, actually consequence could be that you would get actually a lawsuit if you don't, if you're not in line with ever what is required or what you're actually saying. Now digging again a little bit deeper. So on the left side, I'm going to show you a few examples for packaging. For packaging, there's something called Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. It was just now finalized, I think, a week ago from at the trialogue at the EU level. And that requires, for example, something called Design for Recycling score. It's something like a Nutri-score, which you normally know from your foods already. And it's actually telling how good your design is adapted to recycling infrastructure. And here you can see, for example, they will start by 2030. Every design which has a score of E, for example, would be banned starting on 2030. So companies actually need to be in line with that one. And below that one, that's actually part which we are tackling on, is called recyclability at scale, to actually check with the local facilities if it's still in line or not. Then for batteries, for those who are interested, it's something called European Battery Regulation. And below that, you can find, for example, something called circularity in the battery passport, where companies need to make sure that they have a battery removability and replaceability in place, or at least a concept, using recycled content, renewable content, and actually having also thought about the waste management. Similar for this one is also something called end-of-life vehicles, which is something a bit similar, but mainly for vehicles in general. So just to give you a small introduction or brief show about what is actually going on the regulation and the law side. Then coming a little bit to the end of the presentation, so the problematic. So again, you can see the butterfly diagram, which I showed you before. And the first part, which is somehow problematic, let's say for the industry, for example, with packaging in this case again, is the difference in price between virgin and recycled material. So virgin material, you can easily get 1 ton of PET for 500 to 800 euros a ton, whereas for like recycled plastics or PET, you would need to pay around 1,250 euros per ton. So recycled material is more expensive than virgin. So the big question is, why should you actually use recycled material? Something which might influence this would actually be taxing the different materials based on their CO2 emissions. That one actually reducing the cost of recycled material and actually improving or increasing the cost for virgin material. That could be in line with CO2 emissions, but it's just an idea or a thought and not actually something which is applied in the moment. In that line, something for those who are interested in, there's a startup currently in Germany called Woodify. It's a little bit different. It's a forest industry, but here actually the idea is what if actually less is actually more. So for those of you who are interested in, have a look at it. It's actually quite interesting. Then, for example, for the middle of life, in Austria already in 2022, the government launched something called a nationwide repair bonus scheme. So I think it's around 200 euros, which each citizen can get in order to repair different products each year. So that you actually don't should buy something new, but you can get around 200 euros to actually repair different products. Then for the end of life, something actually, it's not funny, but somehow funny on the other way still. Often the missing part of actually infrastructure, in this case, bins. So this, for example, from an expert at, it was actually packaging fair in conference in Germany, where he's claiming like, okay, we're all claiming that we have these recyclable packagings, but actually at the end, the correct bins are missing. So the image which you can see here, we have a perfectly recyclable bottle, but actually if the only bin we have is called Restmüll, so residual waste, it's quite sure that the bottle is not going to be recycled, but actually be burned or actually put it to landfill. So that missing infrastructure is a big problem we currently have at the end of life. And now with that one, also a problem which we encounter was that actually, why should these end of life companies, for example, a sorting or recycling company, share their process knowledge? What is actually their benefit to share their specific process knowledge? Then a small example for extended producer responsibility, so that you understand a little bit better the concept. So the first one is here, for example, the tariffs, the green dot tariffs for Valolux. So each company bringing something on the market needs to pay it. And here you can see, for example, the difference between, sorry, I need to do it like this, between different fractions. So for example, for PT material, which is transparent or slightly blue, you would need to pay around 18 cents per kilogram of packaging you bring to the market. Whereas for dark blue or green PT bottles, you would actually need to pay around 43 cents per kilogram which you bring on the market. So that's actually that eco-modulation, so that you're actually getting some benefits by doing something, a better design. By doing so, you could actually save around 250 euros per ton. For a medium-sized water filling company, it would make a difference, for example, in Luxembourg, of worst case, best case scenario around 120,000 euros per year. A second example which you can find is now in France. They have the first eco-modulation for laptops or for electronics in general. Here I choose the example of an ordinateur portable, so the laptop. It's a very good concept, but a little bit the problem from my perspective is a little bit the prices they have. So in the best case, you would need to pay around 40 cents or 41 cents more for good design, and for 50 cents more for a bad design. So it's different of 9 cents. 9 cents is now the question if that really makes a difference for a laptop, which I don't know, is valued between 500 or 2,500 euros. So if 9 cents really makes a difference here. For the total market in France, for example, it's estimated 28 to have 4 million laptops on the market. The whole industry could make around the difference around 360,000 euros for selling 4 million laptops, worst and best case scenario. So it's again the question, does this actually influence the companies to change something in their designs? Now the last slide actually, a few examples for you to think about or to if you're interested into it. On the design part, for example, there's modular design, which is more and more pushed actually. For example, an example is Fairphone. That, for example, if your battery is destroyed or the camera is not working anymore, you don't need to throw away the whole phone, but actually you can replace simple different parts of it. Another part, which case study which I found together with the TU Delft, quite interesting, where they actually looked how deep is the different components actually located in my product design. So, for example, this vacuum cleaner, if the cable always breaks the same cable, the question is like how deep or how many parts do we actually need to disassemble to get to that specific part which might be defective. Then from the process perspective, just a few examples for you again. So if you don't know them yet, have a look, very interesting. It's a company called, or the startup Luxembourgish one called Circularian, actually doing battery pack disassembly. Here's again idea like why should we recycle, actually throw away a whole battery pack if we can also disassemble it and actually only take out the battery cells which are still working, continue using them, and actually the one who are not working anymore actually into the recycling. So actually a perfect example of the circular economy. Another example is a German startup called Solar Materials, which actually going into that aim of what do we do actually now with the solar panels. So the first solar panels are now on the market for 25 to 30 years. So they're actually coming back now. So how can we actually now efficiently recycle those panels and also different materials? And then the last example is a Swiss company called Eberhard, a recycling company, mainly in the construction. And there, for example, in the example, you can find a video on construction waste processing center, which you can see here, where actually all the construction waste is put on a conveyor belt, and then with cameras you can actually sort different fractions out. So yeah, with that, short to show you the team. So it's me, my colleagues Sri and Alexei, and two mentors, Mark and Bernard, as well as the great support we get from the university, from the students, as well as from an administrative perspective. And our timeline, actually, the scientific research we started beginning of 2019, and we're now in the, let's say, last phase of the JUMP project. So where what Nicola already mentioned before, from FNR JUMP, where we're actually now trying to test and adapt our tool to bring out, hopefully by the end of the year. So with that one, I would actually invite you to join this Mentimeter questionnaire. So you can either go to menti.com and insert this code, or you could simply scan this QR code in order to access the questionnaire. So I give you a minute or 30 seconds to access it, and then we'd actually have a look about what your answers are. So either menti.com with this code, or actually scanning this QR code. The code will still be available now when I move to the presentation. So let's have a look how many people are there. So the first question I'm actually asking you is, oh, sorry, I was at the end. So the first question which I actually would like to ask you is, what is the best way to encourage people or companies to opt for circular solution? So you think it's better to actually reward good designs or actually punish bad ones? Or do you actually think something else might be more interesting? So it would be very interesting to net your feedback, what you would see more valuable actually for the industry in total. And others, please write it into the chat afterwards. What do you think, what other propositions could be to actually opt for circular solutions? Okay, so I think we can see a trend here. So that rewarding apparently for most people is more encouraging than punishing bad designs. Okay, thank you very much for that one. Oh, punishing now gets higher. Then let's try to move to the next question. So the second question would be, how would you actually reward good decision? So just please type in a word what you would say. How could we actually reward? Is it like less taxes? Is it a benefit? Is it whatever? Please just write in whatever you think would be a good reward for decision. Could be for company producing products, but it could also be for private people actually going for, like, yeah, for example, choosing a more sustainable transport or whatever, or product while buying. So we can see subsidies quite a lot, less taxes, a credit, eco-label, also interesting. Digi-coins, yeah. Thank you for that. Lower VAT, lower taxes, financial bonus. Okay, nice, interesting. So let's give it a few more seconds. Social recognition, also very interesting. Privilege, yeah, please write into the chat what you mean exactly with privilege. So what would be privilege for you? A credit, lower price. Okay, interesting. Thank you very much for that one. Then let's move on to the third question. So the same concept, but now the question is, how would you actually punish bad decision? Again, on a private base. So how would you punish, let's say, bad decision from consumers, or how would you punish bad decision from companies? Yeah. So the same again, please write simply a short word or something what you would think would be good punishment in that frame. Penalty, ban from the market. Okay, that's a strict one. Higher price to enter, bad reputation. Taxes again, name and shame. Yeah, quite nice, that one. More taxes, higher price to enter, forbidden by law. Yeah, law is a very interesting concept. Make polluter pay. Yeah, interesting. That goes a little bit into that extended producer responsibility. Now we get quite a lot. Financial punity, penalty fees, no punishment, please. Yeah, also great. Yeah, why not? Please also write it in a question or whatever in the chat. Would be interesting to talk about it afterwards. Forbid too much output. Okay, and regulation. Okay, thank you very much. Then let's move on to the last question. I see there was already a few answers from before. So which products or good do you see the highest need regarding circularity? So other products where you would see an interesting need for it. So I'll read them again. So building material, yeah, building is very interesting as we have quite a lot of materials, simply like the quantities are way higher. Objects bought a lot. Building, charging cables, yeah, interesting one. Mobile phones, electronics, high-tech, food. Food, also please mention maybe in a question, do you think with the food, the packaging or the food waste itself? Plastic bottle, batteries, earplugs, building material, clothing. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so thank you very much. that was also the last question. And then I think I leave the floor to Nicola again, that we can start the discussion and seeing what questions we got into the chat. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well done. First, let me say this, Jeff. Thanks a lot for a very nice presentation and a very interesting one. So we have a few questions, of course, in the chat. We'll come back to this. Maybe perhaps I wrap up rapidly what you have presented. I think you have insisted on some. You look at it from both a sort of, let's put it this way, you look at it from both a technical solution perspective, but you also discuss incentives, right? And you have mentioned in several places that this model of recycling raises some questions. For instance, you have mentioned that the price of recycled plastic typically exceeds the price of virgin plastic. So, of course, what does the market do?
Yep.
When two options have different prices, it tends to favor the least expensive one. Of course, this price is incorrect. It does not take into account the damage that causes the fact that we keep producing new plastic, new waste, and of course, improperly dispose of it. But still, agents are guided by prices on markets, and this can have very serious consequences. You've also discussed taxes, subsidies as one way of incentivizing firms and consumers, in fact, towards the right behavior. And you mentioned, of course, regulations. So, of course, this transition, this new model is one in which everybody has a role to play, right? We, the consumers, the firms, of course, but governments, nations, and supranational instances like the EU, which tries to come up with the proper regulation, the proper instruments to try steer the economy in the right direction. I also had a comment, which this is a comment and a question. Here I abuse my privilege of being the co-host, so I put this question first to you. Of course, recycling also gives us somehow a false feeling of security. We should recycle more. Yes, I guess all else equal, we should recycle more of our waste, a larger proportion of what we waste. But would you not say that, in fact, ideally, we should produce less waste? Perhaps this is a paradox on which you could say something, because the recycling, the circular economy needs a lot of recycling to function. Yep. But we are also exhausting resources which are non-renewable. There is also, as one of the participants comments in the chat, there's an issue of the energy consumption of all these recycling activities. Of course, these big plants are consuming a lot of energy. Yep. Recycling is not a free activity.
No, nothing. Nothing is so free, I guess.
So, of course, with all the technical solutions technical solutions are key. I mean, they're essential. We will need to recycle. We will need to also package less, I think, and eventually we might need to rethink the way we, in fact, consume, and perhaps even the way we live. How do you react to these?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So thank you for that one. Normally, what you can also find quite often in the circular economy in general, it's called the 9 R's or the 3 R's or the 6 R's. And they're normally like the first R's are preferred to the last R's. So I think it's the second or the first or the third one, I'm not very sure. R is called reduce. So always the first aim should be actually reducing it. Everything we don't produce but actually can reduce is better than putting it on the market and afterwards trying to recycle it. And actually only the very last R is recycling. So after R, I think it's R9 then, is recycling, and afterwards we have already like disposal. So there are already discussions about, is recycling actually also circular economy? For me, it plays also a role in it, because it's still, we need to keep the materials at least into the loop. But yeah, it's exactly that. So first try to go to the first R's. So for example, with the battery disassembly, you will be of higher R actually than by recycling a battery. So that's, I think, always a good example of that one.
9 R's. In French, I only know the 4 R's, but
yeah, you can go bigger and bigger. You will probably also already find more R's than 9, I guess.
Okay, reuse, reemploy, repair. I knew
Exactly, all of those.
repair first and then recycle at the very
exactly.
top. I see some related questions that have popped up in the chat. For instance, one is about the cost of the recycled relative to virgin plastics. Can you tell us why it's more expensive?
Yeah, that's it's a good point, and I think one of the most important points for the industry in general. Normally, it's quite linked to the oil prices. So if the oil prices are high, virgin material will also be expensive, and then I think 2, 3, 4 years ago, recycled material was actually less expensive. But as soon as the oil price actually drop, virgin material get cheaper, and by that actually they go below the price of recycled material. Recycling, of course, you need to incorporate all the transports that you have in between and the energy costs and actually running those facilities which you mentioned, and the losses you still have. You will not have 100%, so you always lose a certain amount of materials, which also come up with the price and afterwards.
I see. Interesting how you point at the fact that of course there are many interdependencies and interrelations, and when suddenly the price of crude oil goes down, all of a sudden we will use less of this recycled plastic, as you say. There's also one issue, which is that these big recycling plants, these require massive investments, right?
Exactly.
You have to find investors who are willing to invest in these recycling plants. Now, of course, for these recycling plants to be somehow, if not profitable, at least to break even, they have to recycle a lot, right?
Yep.
So, but our aim ultimately would be to recycle perhaps less, or at least to have less waste entering the recycling system. So here also there is a bit of a tension between the attractivity of building the plants themselves.
Yep.
Because eventually, in an ideal world, we'd like to get rid.
Yep. It's a very interesting point. You're completely right with that one. Even maybe to give you an example, it's mainly the question is always quantity. So how much you actually have available. So in Luxembourg, we don't have an own recycling facility. We are sorting the packagings, but it's actually afterwards going to France or Germany or even Belgium to recycling, as you simply don't have enough quantity here on the market to run it economically viable. So it's not bad that we actually not recycling here, but it's simply more useful that we transfer to another country nearby where we have then enough quantity to recycle. So everything is recyclable theoretically, but we need to have the quantities to actually also do it and bring it back afterwards. So into what product can we actually bring it back, which is also one of the main questions.
Related to that, there's a question in the chat by one of our audience member about acceptance by consumers to buy beverages that are embottled in recycled materials. People are open to drinking from recycled bottles, supportive to that, willing to pay the extra price margin.
So the willingness to pay the extra, that's a big question. I don't have an answer to that one. I think at the moment it's always used as a marketing tool, so that you can actually say, okay, we have recycled material inside, and PET is actually one of the longest or the first materials actually allowed to be recycled into food applications again. So it's very critique and very no, not critique, but very how do you say it, actually very, very strict, the rules which they need to fulfill actually to get again into food grade. So I think the acceptance is there more and more, but the price is the big question. Until when are you willing to pay more for bottle, for example, recycled material than not?
I see. Okay. There are some questions also in the chat again about this. What was also in your quiz at the end about these taxes, subsidies, how to properly incentivize. What's your take on that? You seem to be not so in favor of negative incentives, right? Punishing or taxing more heavily those who do not comply.
It's difficult, and I ask a question because I'm not sure what I actually should think about it. I like actually the concept of first also starting with that eco-modulation, that you need to pay more for bad design than for good design, which is for sure true. But actually, in a recent study, I somewhere also read that actually for big company, it doesn't matter. If they need to pay a little bit more, they do it. It's not. So actually, the question is like, is it heavy enough, the punishment or the penalties, to actually hinder people to do it wrong? And are the incentives actually right? Are they correct or not? Are they actually taking into account everything? So might there be some loopholes actually doing a bad design with still the lowest price? So that's always on the question for regulation and the loopholes or the technique which need to be in line with it.
In one example you mentioned, the case of recycling laptops, I think in France, indeed the penalty differential was so ridiculous that it didn't feel very incentivizing, right, for companies.
So the feedback I got is for that 9 cents, why should they do it? They simply pay the higher price. They don't even look at it. Why should they invest time even in trying to get those 9 cents less? So yeah, then it's again the question about the amount we actually put on it. But I hope and I think that in the future it will come more and more.
We have a question in the chat about combined materials, for instance, or mixed things. You know, when you have an aluminium foil over a cardboard, and all the separability of these various materials. This is exactly what you say about bringing the end-of-life knowledge into the design, right? Anticipating.
Exactly, that's the big thing. If you're mixing materials, it's always a question. Normally you have one recycling facility for one material. So now imagine you have a mix between plastics, paper, and aluminium, and it ends up, let's say, in a plastic facility. They don't want the aluminium and the paper. If it ends up in a paper facility, they don't want the plastic and the aluminium. And the aluminium, well, okay, they could burn the other two, but still they actually only want the aluminium. So by mixing it, it's always quite difficult. Then of course you have that solution everyone is talking about now, chemical recycling. But there at the moment, simply the infrastructure is not yet there to do that economically viable. And the price will be even higher.
There's a remark in the chat that beside what we're discussing, which are really technical, hardcore
Sorry
solutions,
for that.
This is also a matter of education and of cultural shift or cultural change.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So we had a lot of discussions about, for example, how should we actually sort the waste at home? Is it better from an educative point that actually you need to sort different fractions of plastic, glass, and everything? Or do you simply look at it from a technical point and actually the machines, they're getting better and better? So put everything in one bag, or maybe biological and not biological products, and let the machines afterwards sort. So that's a big discussion. I don't have an answer to it. So material-wise, it's better you put everything in one and let the machine sort. But of an educative point of view, of course, you get the consumer that feeling like they are doing it, I don't need to care. I don't have an answer for that, but yeah, it's very interesting and very important question. I think we also need to ask ourselves.
I take a last question from the chat, perhaps. I see one which just got added. There's a question of recovery of heat recovery, end of life of plastic. So I guess that's just incinerating what cannot be recycled. I imagine this happens a lot, does it not?
Yeah. So, for example, a good example is that Scandinavian countries, which until recently mostly burned or used energy recovery of the plastics. So, of course, you get the energy out of it, but actually you lose the materials, and you actually getting out also quite a lot of CO2. Right? But for example, now they had it's called Motala. It's between Göteborg and Stockholm in Sweden. They now set up this biggest sorting plant in Europe. So those are doing around 45 tons per hour of sorting plastic waste or packagings. So they're also investing into actually reducing the amount actually burning and trying to recycle it. So energy recovery, if you would look at the 9 R's, it would be again below the recycling.
It's the last resort somehow.
Yeah. If you consider the solution, yes or no, but yeah.
And of course, all these nice solutions we come up with, and we are grateful for all your work, will then need to be somehow transferred to non-developed country where the real snag, where the real problem is, because we are in fact doing quite well in Europe. But the real producers, for instance, of plastic waste are of course the countries where there is no waste management and waste collection system organized at all. So this is also where our help would be necessary.
And that's then again the big question, like, should it be allowed to bring then those there? Because we are producing those products, to bring it to a place where actually there's not an infrastructure available. Then it's the question like, should that be allowed? Yes or no? But there are a lot of things coming into it, like for example how long the product keeps on, so the durability of the food as well. But yeah, for me, of course, that's a big question. Like, what do we do with all the waste in places where we have less infrastructure, which is actually the big problem we have currently.
Thanks a lot, Jeff, for having agreed to play this game and answer these.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you. Great
tricky questions. Back to Mathieu.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Thanks a lot, Nicolas. I know that discussion could last even longer because I've met you both and I've spent time with you both, so I know it can last. So thank you again for this discussion and interesting subject. I hope you all enjoyed the presentation and discussion. The record will be available online on the sustainability page. Give me a few days to work on it. Before closing the WebEx, I would like to invite you all to our next Sustainability Lunch Talk on May 15. Subject will be In Search for Post-Growth Economies. It will be presented by Professor Christian Schulz from the FHSE, together with Dr. Anthony Lepinter from the FHSE as well. Don't forget to visit the sustainability webpage of the university to learn more about the coming lunch talk and to subscribe to the sustainability letter. I see that some questions were asked and not answered, so I will pass them to Jeff with your name, and if he has time to, if he has time and willingness to answer, he will do it. I also saw people talking about what they are working on, so same thing. I will pass that to Jeff. And someone was asking for the presentation. So once again, I will pass everything to Jeff. I will send him a nice email with all the information so that he can do whatever he wants with it, reuse it, recycle it. He does whatever he wants. Thanks a lot again, and have a nice day. And yeah, thank you very much. Bye.